Good afternoon, everyone. I am Yolanda Gautier, and I am with the Center for African American Health as the Senior Living Health and Wellness Navigator. Thank you so much for joining in with us on our Collaborative Health Summit. And with that, we are moving into the home stretch. So I would like to introduce our next two speakers, but before I do that, just a little bit of housekeeping. As you know, because we're virtual, your faces will not be shown. You are on mute as well. And we would like for you to show our panelists some love by putting your questions in the chat, and we will make sure that we get to that. We also have a Q&A session box where you can put questions in there as well, and we will definitely make sure that we get to these questions and that we are able to provide those answers for you. At the end of the session, we would like for you to let us know what you thought, how you felt, what you gleaned, what you learned, and just what you got by being here. So with that, we have a Whova I Like It, which you'll find. And I am going to now turn it over to Omar Montgomery and Dr. Janiece Mackey. Take it away. The show is yours. The floor is yours.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I'm going to share screen. Sweet. So welcome, everyone. I'm super excited to be in space with you all and to have an opportunity to be in dialogue and chop it up with co-presenter President Omar Montgomery. So first, just want to acknowledge the lands that we're on. We're on the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho lands, and I think it's critical to acknowledge that and pay homage today. And now we're going to kick off with some introductions.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me clearly. I'm at volunteering while doing this, which I was expected to do and happy to be a part of the Center for African American Health Summit and presenting with Dr. Janiece Mackey, but I'm also volunteering at a vaccination clinic. So if you hear me talking and there's an echo or a little bit of background noise, because there's still people being vaccinated downstairs, but definitely looking forward to this discussion and looking forward to being on working with Dr. Mackey.
Right on, thank you. I'm Dr. Janiece Mackey. I'm the co-founder and executive director of a youth organization entitled Young Aspiring Americans for Social and Political Activism, or YAASPA for short. And super excited to be in partnership with President Omar Montgomery. We've been working very closely together, YAASPA and the Aurora NAACP. We actually literally just got off a call together, like literally moments ago, with our youth leaders who were engaging Aurora district leaders concerning cops in schools. So just very excited about our intergenerational partnership. And because we want to be in dialogue, would love to know who's in the space. Again, President Omar Montgomery and I were talking about, please don't give a sermon, right? But would love to hear your voices. In 30 seconds or less, your name, what brought you to the space, and something or someone bringing you joy.
And if you want to take it off mute when you do that, and then are they going to do it in the chat, Dr. Mackey, or will they be able to do it verbally?
Verbally would be great, but if you prefer the chat, by all means, posting in chat would be best. Okay, sounds good. Welcome, Laura. Or you can raise your hand and we will be able to take you off of mute.
think Sandra Miller has her hand raised.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, I'm Sandra Miller, and I am a Denver native. And with this last election, I just feel like I need to be involved in doing something. I keep being told I need to run for office. I'm not really into that, but I'm very interested in, I recently joined the NAACP, and I'm just interested in hearing what you have to say. And that's my 30 seconds. Thank you. Hey, Mike.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. We see you in the chat as well. Welcome. Thank you so much. Shout out to Dr. Love, Charlotte Board Chair, Dr. Allen. Thank you all so much for being here in this space. And to all of you, trust me, it's reciprocal. Shared wisdom in the space with y'all beautiful people is going to be fantastic this afternoon. So grounding is extremely important to us, right? Many of you all know who've shared space with President Omar and I. We wouldn't necessarily say we believe in safe spaces, right? But we do believe in relational spaces. So we really hope that we can have a relational space today. Furthermore, right, expecting non-closure, because the destination is the journey. So we all know this is ongoing work, right? And definitely please feel free to use the chat if you're most comfortable with that, because we will be recording and trying to get information from you all in that way too, for data points. And again, please feel free to be in dialogue with us. So we definitely don't want to be talking at you all. Positionality work, right? So identity absolutely informs how we position ourselves, which is our positionality, right? So that's extremely important to acknowledge. But furthermore, it's one thing to acknowledge where we sit based upon our identities in our ecosystems, but our abilities to reflect, right, on how our identities and our positionality inform the way that we reflect upon ourselves is extremely critical. And that's so much of what we're going to be talking about today is really that self-work component, right? So toxicity. So this may look familiar to some of you all. If you're familiar with Dr. Jen Wright's work on Healing Center engagement, Dr. Jen Wright put together a Healing Center engagement toolkit, which has this really beautiful image that is here before you, which shows like pretty much all the isms, right? And various forms of toxicity that we navigate at varying levels. So speaking of those levels of navigating toxicity, we absolutely can navigate them at the individual level, the interpersonal level, and also the institutional level. But what we really want to talk about and center today is humanizing self-care as we navigate those varying levels. And particularly today, that individual level in navigating these forms of toxicity. So now we're going to engage in some storytelling and some dialogue and share how we have handled toxicity in full transparency in unhealthy ways towards humanizing self-care.
Yeah, Dr. Mackey, this has been a journey. I've probably been in social justice work since I've been in college. And I have to say that in many ways, you believe that you're doing the work of the people. You believe that you're out there, you're marching, you're going to court, you're doing everything you can, but sometimes you neglect self-care. And I remember being in college, we used to have this debate about who got the less sleep, because those who got more sleep, we thought were sleeping on the job, wasn't awake, wasn't conscious. So if you can understand this, a group of college students, we got to prepare for finals, things of this nature. Now, this is before they had the monster drinks and things and all this. So we would have a couple of shots of coffee and eating Taco Bell, not even worried about diet, cholesterol, or any of those things. It was just about how can we be these super people that go out and help people. And what I've noticed, fast forward over the years, that I had that mindset even in my 20s. I had that mindset even in my 30s, even to the point where, you know, you have that partner, you have that wife, you have that person that's there with you, and they're watching you drive, and, you know, you're just feeling like you're this superhuman, but really life hits you and say, you know what? You need to go get that checkup. Not only do you need to go get that checkup physically, you need to get that checkup um, with your family. Are you having good are you talking to your children? Are you talking to your wife? Are you talking to your parents? Are you still grounded in some type of morals, values, and faith? Because you can get caught up in all this stuff, Dr. Mackey. I mean, literally, you got all these, and you don't realize how much of an impact it's having on you, your values. Sometimes you neglect the ways that you were brought up and start taking in some of the toxic things that you're fighting against. So I now close on this. It's been my mother and my partner, Regina Edmondson, who constantly pulls me over and say, hey, Omar, have you checked in with yourself lately? And that means go sit yourself in the corner, turn off the TVs, turn off the computers, go find something to do to ground yourself. Because if not, you're going to burn out at an early age. And many of my friends who we've had this mindset prior to COVID and since COVID, I am sending more condolences of young people who have been in social justice movements than just your regular person who probably didn't add all these additional pressures in their life. So I'm gonna let you take it from there, Dr. Mackey.
Yeah, there's a lot here for me. I same thing, right? Definitely was really, really civically engaged in my college years. But I was in my angry stage while I was civically engaged at that time. So most of y'all know what I'm talking about with regards to the angry stage, right? Where I was very much engaged in a lot of performative activism, protest, speaking up in every single class in the classroom, right? Constantly engaging in taxation at my own expense, because I thought that's what was necessary for the cause, if you will. Fast forwarding a bit, after college, I was then very much an activist in my workspaces as well, which was also very taxing. And again, it was happening at my own expense, to where I wasn't necessarily being the mom that I wanted to be. I wasn't being the partner and wife I wanted to be. I was literally dragging kids to meetings that really I had no business at, just for the sake of performing, right? And showing that I was civically engaged, especially because I was younger, and thinking that folks, you know, wouldn't think that youth were civically engaged. So I was going to be the one, right, to hold the mantle and say, no, actually, we are here, and I'm representing the young people today, right? And so I got to a point where my health literally started to decline. So when people talk about like knots in your stomach, I literally was getting knots in my stomach in very literal ways, to where I had to, as President Omar said, go somewhere and sit down. And I had to talk with my partner about a plan in order to sustain myself in this work. And so what that ended up looking like was creating an organization, right, which is YAASPA, Young Aspiring Americans for Social and Political Activism, because I knew that this was not just my story, right, but this was the many stories of the young Black students that we were working with and BIPOC students that we were engaging with. So then I was like, well, how can I model a different way of being civically engaged, right? And really honor the ways in which youth desire to show up. And then again, it's a cycle, right? Because what ended up happening, unfortunately, is you got to get grants, right? And so this notion of getting outcomes on the backs of Black and Brown students became an issue. Where it wasn't necessarily my biological children then, it was youth, where I was like, hey, we got to go to this board meeting, we got to go to the Capitol, we got to go here, we got to go there, we got to show up, right? Because they think that y'all don't want to show up, so you got to show up. But what was that modeling again for them, right? Unnecessary taxation, and definitely was not anywhere near humanizing self-care or even reflecting what self-care looks like. And so fast forward, right? Obviously now I know better. So I promise y'all I'm not out here doing that in these streets with these young people. So with that in mind, it was really important that we value set, right? And that we begin to model what collective leadership looks like with our youth, with our partners like the Aurora, the NAACP as well, so that we can show there's a different way to be civically engaged in ways that are more dignifying and humanizing and honoring ourselves so that we can be sustained in this work.
You know, Dr. Mackey, the term humanizing self-care, are we saying that internally we have dehumanized self-care? What does that mean? What does that look like? Because I hear a lot of people say, well, why are you happy? What you smiling about? Like everything in the world has to be that there has to be some type of anger. There always have to be a protest. There's always have to be a fight. And you know, when you and I was prepping for this, you know, I said the one thing I had to learn was to relax. It's okay to smile. It's okay to laugh. Dr. Brenda J. Allen, who's on this call, when she was at the University of Colorado, Denver, before we even started our staff meetings, she would have people breathe, have people meditate. And you know, when it first started, you know, I'm like, you know, Dr. Allen, you know, I want to get to the agenda. I don't want to sit up here and breathe and meditate and figure out listening to some music. I'm like, Dr. Allen, let's get to the agenda. I didn't realize I needed to be centered. I didn't realize I needed to breathe. I didn't realize I needed to start off in a space where when we get to the agenda, we can, one, internally humanize ourselves, but also humanize the other people in the room so you're not coming in with this bad attitude and things of this nature.
Word on that. Love that. So now we want to be in dialogue and hear from you all. And it sounds like you would need to raise your hand so that we can hear your voices. What has been your experience with self-care and what have you found to work and not work?
And please feel free to raise your hand in the chat if you want to speak on this, definitely.
Hi, this is Charlotte Williams. I think one of the things I had to do with self-care recently is slow down on social media a little bit, right? Because I had caught myself arguing with a bunch of people I didn't even know. Every time something came up, and I'm thinking, oh yeah, I'm telling them. But then I'm like, I'm sitting up here looking crazy, arguing with some strangers. I'm still not going to change their mind. So I know at the beginning of the year, we had a fasting at church. And that's one of the things I fast was social media for 21 days. And that helped a lot.
Hi, I'm Rashawn. And one of the hardest self-care things that I ever did was I dropped out of grad school. I was going into really awful student debt and knew that I would be over 100,000 in debt if I didn't drop out, and sort of gave myself permission to not strive for the things that I was told to strive for, and like sort of suggest, you know, I let myself write my own story in that way. I let myself like set my own goals and decided that, you know, I had gone to school because I kind of everybody in my life was telling me I was supposed to. That was just the next step. And I saw that it was wrecking my mental and financial health. And I stopped. And I think that, you know, I was better for it in lots of ways.
Something that I've started is, my name is Carolyn Love, and something that I've started is I've made a commitment to walk 2.5 to 3 miles a day. And it really is working. And I mean, I walk even when it's cold outside, because it's just something about feeling the natural air that just works for me. I do it early in the morning after I spend 30 minutes reading scripture, in meditation, and listening to some music that just nourishes my soul. And then I go out for a walk, come back in and start my day.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I'm really excited you brought that into the space as well, because there is something about movement. And I was speaking with Dr. Frenita Ware about her radical self-care. And one of the things that she was talking about was movement. And then like, for me, like sitting at this desk all day, like not beating myself up about what I didn't do, but even just acknowledging like, I did 3 squats today, or I did take a walk around the block, right? And making sure I get in those baby steps, because it literally does something for us in our mind, body, and soul to ensure that we're moving.
I'm looking in the chat, and it's look like there's severe hearing loss and attempting to still work despite you know.
Hi,
Mack,
this is Carmen.
go
Hi,
ahead,
this is
Carmen.
Carmen. I just wanted to say too, one of the things I think that we fail to do with our own self-care is allowing ourselves to say no. Sometimes we can't take on every task, every opportunity, everything that we want to do, even though we want to do it, but you have to allow yourself sometimes and be in that space to say, no, I just can't take on another thing.
I'm still having a hard time with that one, but I'm in recovery.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that into the space. Good to see you, Carmen. There's so much there, especially when we're thinking about notions of progress. We're going to end up talking about this a little bit later, but oftentimes, especially in light of everything that was exacerbated last year, right, with regards to white supremacy and institutionalized violence on Black and brown bodies, like we were called on to perform so much. And there's this notion that we should have gratitude, right? For these quote unquote opportunities to perform, but definitely had to learn over the years and ensure that students know too that every opportunity is not an opportunity, right? And folks' emergency is not our emergency, just because folks are beginning to suddenly awaken to this notion of white supremacy and racism. So I'm really happy that that was brought in this space as well. Anyone else want to speak to this point? Or do we feel complete, as Dr. Love would say here? Cool. So the last thing I do want to acknowledge as well, thank you so much for Sean for sharing with regards to schooling. Oh, yay, Dr. Brenda Allen wants to speak. I just want to say with regards to schooling, there's an element there with regards to playing the game, quote unquote, that we all get pulled into because of capitalism, right? And so I'm really happy that you resisted that in a way that was honoring for yourself. I'm not saying don't go to school, right? Obviously, I got a PhD, go to school. If that's your hustle, right? I honor that. And at the same time, though, we have to really be grounded in the why. And we have to also acknowledge the versatile ways in which we can honor ourselves in doing this work in ways that are humanizing. And I know Dr. Allen wants to speak, so I'm gonna be quiet.
Thank you so much. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Can you
yes,
all hear me?
Yes, yes, Dr. Allen.
Okay, excellent. I thank you all very much for this opportunity. I ground my approach to self-care based on Audre Lorde, who said, quote, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare," end quote. And for me, I had to resist being socialized, especially as a Black woman from a certain time in our history, although I'm learning that my younger sisters are being socialized in the same way about caring for everyone else almost than myself. So I grounded in that because it's so true. If I'm not caring for myself, I'm not prepared to do the work. I cannot show up and fight. The struggle continues. Also, I appreciate the privileges of my life that I'm seeking to have for others. So I want to optimize those. So, and I try to put self-care throughout my life, throughout my days. Sometimes I think people believe self-care is, I'm going to take that vacation in 3 weeks and so forth, which could be part of it, as well as, however, throughout the day. So I try to make it all 5 senses, whether it is pausing to enjoy and really savor a cup of red bush tea, whether it is putting on Sirius XM and grooving to some old school R&B, whether it is one of my wonderful goddaughters sent me some aromatherapy. So I have my little vapor thing going, maybe with some mint and eucalyptus or whatever, but really incorporating it throughout. Pausing whenever I eat to actually smell my food and taste it and just be grateful for all of those capabilities, even as I remain centered and focused on affecting social change. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Allen, for that. Love Audre Lorde, super grounding for sure. And thank you, Carmen. Can you all see my screen still? Okay, great. So I'm going to transition us now. So when President Omar, Montgomery, and I were talking about this talk and some themes, we ended up coming up with these 5 different areas. So if you think about number 5, kind of the base, and then all the way up to where we want to get to, these are some of the things that we talked about just from our own lived experiences, and I'd be curious if any of these resonate with you all. So first is that hurt people hurt people. We were talking about this for quite some time because oftentimes when we are engaged in this work, and like I said, I was in my angry phase, right? When I was doing my work, and don't get me wrong, it can be cyclical, right? And that we can ebb in and out of that angry phase as well, with regards to our racial identity development in tandem with the socio-political context as well and things that are happening. But sometimes when we don't know that we're hurt and experiencing that hurt, we can end up causing more harm to the movement than what we had intended, right? And so I think about this on a personal level with our work, where we work with a lot of young professionals, and with regards to that, particularly young professionals of color, right, who are coming potentially from spaces where they have been harmed by white supremacy in their respective professional spaces. And then they may come to us, right, with certain levels of toxicity, which can be difficult. And so I always be telling them, right, like, hey, I get if you're in your angry phase, right, but don't take it out on me, right? Like, I'm with you. Don't allow that toxicity to translate to our work ecosystem, or particularly and most importantly, to the youth that we're working with as well. So it's really, really important to be able to humanize ourselves in our self-care, because we have to constantly be in dialogue with ourselves with regards to our hurts and our pains, and things that we're navigating. To think about that is, if you look at number 4, is then we tend to self-medicate in unhealthy ways, right? So I know for myself, I definitely had engaged in drinking when I was having a lot of stress. And I was like, oh, it's just, it's just a glass of wine, right? Or it's just, a truly whatever, just something for me to calm myself, so to speak. But that wasn't really necessarily humanizing the self-care in the way that I needed to, because it was more of a distraction. It was a Band-Aid, right? It wasn't necessarily getting at the roots of what I needed to do in order to connect my mind, body, and soul in more healthy ways. And so trust me, definitely not judging, if folks do necessarily engage in these substances, but when you're doing it to self-medicate, obviously that becomes a problem. And then also navigating loss and guilt, right? Oftentimes in doing this work, it can literally be loss that we're experiencing among us. I know President Omar, when we were speaking, we were talking about literal loss, right? And so we were talking about how there can be loss in our communities with regards to crime or what have you. And what does that look like? With regards to having what we call those village conversations. There are conversations, right, that we need to have as a village, particularly when I'm saying village, I mean Black folks, right? With regards to how we can engage in collaborative healing, for instance, with one another, and really have these tough conversations with regards to having a community plan in place as we're navigating loss and navigating guilt around that. And then that goes up to this notion of the spectrum of grace and accountability. So with regards to grace and accountability, we talk about it on a spectrum because oftentimes, obviously, if you are given so much grace, right, then there's no accountability in tandem with that. And then it's a disservice, again, to the movement, or a disservice to perhaps that young professional of color that you're working with, right? Or that young Black activist, if you're giving too much grace without accountability and having those conversations. So it's really necessary for sure to have both, but not to be too far on one end of the spectrum or another. And then as President Omar was talking about as well, as far as kind of the lightness, right, that we want to get to in this work too, is celebrating the fruits of our labor and living our best life, right? So there's also this notion that if you are an activist, that you're supposed to be broke, that you're supposed to constantly be in struggle, that you're supposed to constantly kind of be at it on your own, rather than as a collective. And there's also this notion that you're not supposed to be celebrating the fruits of your labor. You're supposed to be at every single meeting. You're not supposed to be spending time with your kids, your family, or even with yourself in your own space, right? And so it's extremely important to think about our work cultures as well, and the ways that we can perpetuate that, even sometimes unintentionally as well. So something simple, for instance, with regards to the ways at least that I try and manifest that in my workspace is I don't micromanage my team, right? We really operate on a high speed of trust. And I don't expect every single hour of their day to be blocked with something, because I understand the importance of that time to be with oneself and to be still as well. So would love to hear from you all. If there's any of these areas, these themes that we came up with that are resonating with you all. And again, you'll have to raise your hand to come off of mute. Right on, thank you, Carmen. Yeah, thank you for that, Dr. Allen. I've been working on that as well. I'm laughing because we fast at the beginning of every single year. We do what's called the Daniel's fast. And I just find myself just so grounded, literally, like physically, right? But even spiritually. And then, like, of course, the last day of the fast, though, right? It's like, oh, let's go to Senzetti's or let's go somewhere, right? Not this year, obviously, but we end up binging on all kinds of food that we probably could have eradicated in the first place. And then I find myself again, here we are in the month of February, right? And I'm like, okay, I need to get my veggie burgers on. I need to be eating things that are more digestible for my body. So I appreciate you bringing that in the space. Awesome. So President Omar, we were just discussing these 5 different things that we had came up with as we were building out this presentation and seeing what areas resonate with folks.
You know, Dr. Mackey, remember earlier we were talking about hurt people, and sometimes what we probably need to put down there, sometimes don't realize that they're hurting other people. Sometimes believing that they're doing what's in the best interest, but not realizing that their approach could be causing more trauma, and more pain. And, you know, because we're always sometimes in fight mode, not all of us, but some of us. And it could be the simplest thing, like good morning, and you're like, well, you know, good morning, what? I need you to do this, and this. Not a good morning, how you doing? You enjoy your day, but good morning. Watch out for the police. Oh, make sure you do your homework. Make sure you're advocating for yourself. I mean, we didn't re-traumatize our kids and sometimes our loved ones before they even left the door, because we're in fight mode the whole time.
Yeah, that absolutely really resonates with me as well. My kids and my partner, they definitely know when something's off. And I appreciate that, but I've been definitely trying to catch myself much more as well if I am snappy or anything of that nature. And I remember I was talking to my kids and partner about a recent professional conversation, and they were like, Mom, it's 9 o'clock and you're talking about work and you need to stop. And I was like, you know what? Thank you. I do need to stop. So I love how you're talking about how it impacts the family as well, and our loved ones and those around us, because they do notice these things and definitely don't want them to pick up on those habits.
I would even say sometimes in the workplace, because you're in this mindset that you always have to be defensive and you always have to advocate. And in some cases, you could be saying the right things but pushing people away, and pushing away people that would fall in line and advocate with you, because you're just constantly in that space of I have to defend myself now. And some of that is because you probably have experienced trauma at an early age, and mental health is not something we talk about in our community, especially the those of us that got this gray going on. We, the last thing we wanted to do was to be sitting in front of someone talking about our mental health issues, because to us it was a sign of weakness, when truly it's a sign of strength, and figuring out how to build up your armor so that you can keep yourself healthy and those around you healthy.
Yeah, I appreciate you talking about the workplace as well. I know last year when there was just so much happening and it was all compounding. I remember I had a breakdown, so to speak, but I don't want to call it a breakdown. I had a vulnerable moment, I'll say, emotionally with my team, to where like I was in tears. Those of y'all that know me, I'm very much like a hugger, and I thrive off of like being in community spaces. And so much of that obviously was taken in light of COVID. And so when, thinking about the socio-political context that we were navigating and are still navigating, right, with regards to the exacerbated institutionalized violence on Black bodies, trying to hold and handle the way that our students are dealing with that in tandem with literally my own kids as well, and not being able to like hug folks even, right? That was very difficult. And it got to a point where I did need to have that moment where I had a very vulnerable engagement with our team, to just cry. And I had to thank them. I said, thank y'all for holding me, because so often I feel like I have to hold y'all. And in doing this work, oftentimes we don't allow ourselves sometimes to be held, because we do have that armor up. And so it's so necessary and healthy to have that shared vulnerability.
I agree 100%. And the other part to that is, and number one, you deserve to enjoy life and the fruits of your labor. I believe that people should enjoy, yes, there's a lot of trauma, a lot of things that's taking place in our society. But even those who are on the front lines advocating should have a space where they can just go read a book, go on vacation, a staycation, um, have game night. you know, just little simple things. And I know people have issues with holidays because of their origins and things of this nature. I may not agree with the origin of the holiday, but what I do agree with is spending time with family. And if my family believe that's a holiday, I'm not going to spend my holiday trying to tell them why it's not a holiday. I'm going to spend my time with the family, just sharing that love, sharing that experience, seeing my nieces and nephews I ain't seen in a while, giving people hugs. I was that person that used to go into the holidays saying, the 4th of July was this, and this, and Thanksgiving was this, to the point where the family just left me in the room by myself. I mean, they just literally was like, hey, we don't want to be around your toxic butt. We want to sit over here and play dominoes and figure out when the next family meeting gonna be. Why don't you go sit yourself in the corner? So I had to learn that not to force, to enjoy the moment and put the politics aside.
That's a lot. And it resonates so much. I'm happy you brought that into the space as well, because my partner and I talk a lot about this in the family when we're watching things. We're so trained, I know, like in our field, to critique, right? And so we'll be watching things, like Queen Sugar. I don't know if y'all watch Queen Sugar, but me and the family love to watch that. It just came back out. We watch it every single Tuesday. And the entire time, it's just this critique, right? And then, by the end of the show, they were like, well, we might watch it without you because we just didn't necessarily want all the commentary associated with the show. We just wanted to enjoy the show. Like, yes, there's these elements in the show, right, with regards to, colonization, all the things, taking of land, all the things that I'm definitely very passionate about. But they also like, we just want our mom to watch the show with us as our mom, right? We didn't want you to do all that. I also remember, I'll share vulnerably as well with regards to Black Panther. And we went to go see it, and obviously love Black Panther, right? Absolutely amazing. But again, right, I'm trained to critique, right? And I'm saying this as an academic, right? But also the fact that sometimes we can critique too much, again, and we center that too much to the point where we're not enjoyable to be around. And that's so important. And it's okay to just enjoy things as well and not even have a critique, and not to necessarily always watch things with certain lenses, if you will, as well.
So you're that movie critic as well, Dr. Mackey, where people go to the movies with you and you're saying, hey, is that the first Black person to die in the movie? Oh, that wasn't authentic Africa. Oh, that really couldn't happen. I used to be like that. And I'm going to tell you, Tyler Perry indirectly changed my mindset in that. And when he opened up his soundstage in Atlanta, I used to be overly critical about Tyler Perry movies. But then when I read an article about how many people he employed, how many lives he changed, how he named his soundstage, the different rooms on the soundstage, after people who the shoulders that he stood on. He was like, hey, these are the people I want to recognize. And I began to say, okay, let me not be so critical. And let me begin to look at the messaging. And if there are some things I like, fine. If there's some things I don't like, fine. But don't let me be out here saying, oh, wow, he's out here doing all these things that are stereotyping Black people and things of this nature. I had to learn how to just enjoy the movie and then be critical in those spaces where it's time for it to be, and not force it on everyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. I was also talking to my partner about, sometimes he'll ask questions, right?
Right.
With regards to like characters. And we had this really kind of vulnerable conversation with regards to like gender norms, right? And particularly within the Black community. And he was like, niece, he calls me niece. He was like, by the time we get done watching the show, I just think that, dang, do you still love me like I'm a Black man? The way you talk about Black men, when I ask you a question, you're like, well, because Black men need to blah, 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 right? Mm-hmm. And he gets the whole male privilege and all of that, right? But I think that's so important as well because, there's this social justice choir, right? And this notion that we have to constantly show this wokeness with regards to our lenses, the way we think about things, the way we frame things, telling people to do their village work, but also like, again, back to those vulnerable moments, saying, and here's what I'm going to do. Here's what we as Black women are going to do as well, right? And him being able to do the same. Because sometimes, I know I don't realize I'm even engaging in that. I'm just like, oh, well, I think that's the perspective maybe that you need. You and the fellas need to talk about blah, blah, blah. And he's not disagreeing, right? He's like, no, I completely agree. But if that's the main mantra I'm hearing from you, I'm just wondering where I sit as your husband, as your partner.
Wow. I remember going to a conference, and every single speech was about the most traumatic thing about Black America, the most traumatic thing about Black men. I was in a space yesterday, Dr. Mackey, where we were supposed to have been talking about politics in the Black community, but it ended up being a gender war between who got traumatized the most between Black men and Black women. And I disengaged. And I said, well, is it okay if we talk about some of the progressions that we have made? And I named the progressions, and they went right back to the trauma. Like, they couldn't even acknowledge that there has been some good things that has been done, that someone has actually made it. Someone has actually accomplished something. And it's like, we don't want to acknowledge it. It's okay to acknowledge those things. It's okay to feel good about them. But some people feel like, no, we have to keep going back to the trauma, the trauma, the trauma, the trauma, the trauma. I'm going to say this. Black people have accomplished a lot, and we could put a smile on our face and celebrate some of those things while still out here advocating for the things that we need to continue to address because of systemic racism and all these other isms that are out there that we're constantly fighting to correct.
Yes, yes to all of that. You saying that is making me think about the youth village, right? And the work that we're doing literally now, right, in partnership with one another. I was having this conversation with the team about some of these opportunities, which really are opportunities, like speaking with district leadership, right? And we engage in youth participatory action research with our youth, and the whole point, right, of engaging in youth participatory action research is the action, right? We want to inform policy. And so sometimes that attachment to trauma and attachment to that toxicity, right, can lead us to like, oh, well, we don't need to talk to anybody, right? Oh, well, maybe, we should ask the students if they want to talk to the leadership. And it's like, well, but the whole point is to have that power broken and to speak with leaders who are in position of power, right? In order for the policies to be changed that the youth village is desiring to see. And so I was just thinking about like adultism. I know Rashawn can relate to this at Project Voice work, right? With regards to how sometimes we can get in the way with regards to the necessary work that our constituencies and that even we are desiring because of that attachment to that toxicity as well. There's no point in us doing our work if there's not going to be any change. And we can relish in the trauma, right? But there has to be some healing from that. Like, yes, that acknowledgement of the trauma, acknowledgement of that toxicity. But if we can't move on to the collaborative healing, if we can't move on to like celebrating the wins, like the way I frame to students, right, is things are happening and people are paying attention because of y'all's labor. Like that should be celebrated. And so even just the shifts in framing is just so important. I saw Dr. Allen put in the chat as well, like language matters, right? So the framing of these things and sometimes these opportunities that really are opportunities for change, they're just so critical, these moments.
Agree. I was listening to earlier before I had to run downstairs. Someone said we were talking about fasting. And I think it's important to fast in multiple ways. I fast during Ramadan. And when I fast during Ramadan, I change my diet. I change my mentality. It's like a cleansing moment for me. And I heard someone say, hey, I had to take a fast from social media. And the reason why we are taking that fast from social media is because depending on who's your friends on your news line, you can have something come up that's traumatic every 30 seconds, every time you hit refresh. Now that's for adults. What about our youth, who every time they hit the refresh screen, they're probably seeing something traumatic and probably don't know how to handle it. And if the parents are in a traumatic state and the kids are in a traumatic state, what happens when everyone goes home? How does that work? How do we heal in that home? How do we make our homes a place where you can be healed and not a place where you feel like you want to run away from? You know, you and that you sitting in the driveway and you're like, do I want to go in here? How do we turn our homes into a place where it's healing taking place and not us being re-traumatized?
Yeah, I think that's so necessary. I think a part of that too, it goes back to that no. And yeah, Charlotte was the one earlier talking about that social media fast. It is so critical because it does shift your energy. And sometimes it's hard to even pinpoint how that energy even shifted. So really being mindful of literally what are you doing, right? Like, were you on just social media? Were you just on a call for an hour about a lot of nothing or a lot of trauma? And did that shift your energy? Did that shift the way that you're projecting and the way that you are coexisting in your space at home? I shared with some of you all, my uncle has schizophrenia, and it's been a family affair, right, with regards to supporting him and ensuring that he's experiencing dignity, right, in a myriad of ways, right, with these interlocking systems that obviously don't support him to do so as a Black man. And so it's to the point now where we have to have rotations, right? And I didn't even realize that that was so critical, but it goes back to that ability to sit with oneself and say no sometimes. And so because it's a family affair, we have to have those real vulnerable conversations where we're like, okay, hey, who's gonna go visit this time, right? Who's gonna pick up here this time? Who's gonna pick up there? And being willing to also honor even each other's no's within a family is something that's really hard to do sometimes. And so we've had to honor some of our fellow family members' no's at times because, you know, sometimes folks are like, you know what, I gotta tap out for a couple of weeks, but I'll be back, right? And so then we come in and we say, okay, let's shift around the rotation because so-and-so, we want them to take care of themselves. We want them to be well so that we can continue to ensure that they're able to tap back in ways that are meaningful and that don't perpetuate further harm or hurt kind of in our familial ecosystem as well. And there was a moment for me where I'm the type of person, y'all know me, that I will overextend myself for others because I call it village work, right? And so I'm constantly saying like, oh, well, of course I'm gonna do this for the family because it's the village work. If I can do this for, you know, our student village, of course I would do that for the family village. But then I get to these points where I've overextended myself and my family will notice. They'll just see this complete energy shift and they're just like, you know what, we know something's wrong, we don't know what, but we know that you just were dealing with your uncle's situation and we think you need to take a break. You need to take a break. And sometimes it's us even giving ourselves permission to do that, that can be so painful and so difficult. And so I appreciate you talking about what that looks like within the family as well.
You know, Dr. Mackey, I just want to add to that real quickly. I have a good friend of mine in Los Angeles who has some liver damage. And he called me 2 weeks ago and said, hey, I think I may die soon because of this liver damage. And he says, Omar, I need one thing from you. I need you to answer your phone each time I call. So wait a minute. So I said, okay. And so, but I know this friend, and each time he calls me, even before this, it was always a toxic conversation about every single person he doesn't like. So I had to manage the expectations and say in the past. So the first 3 days I answered every time he called. And then each time I got off the phone, I was like, wait a minute, I'm not in the right headspace. So I had to begin to manage to say, okay, I'll make it once a day at a time when I can really take it in and recenter myself. Because sometimes you may say yes to something and you say, yeah, I can do this, I can do that. But sometimes we are afraid to bring in reinforcements. We are afraid to ask for help. We are afraid to say, you know what, I can't do it, but this is what I can do. And I hope this can help. And so I'm learning, and even as we're having this workshop, I'm still learning how to address certain things, because when someone tells you they're dying and they're like, the only thing we want you to do is answer the phone, you think that's a simple thing. It's going to be but if the conversation is toxic and it's putting you in a toxic space, you have to be able to recognize that and say, okay, let me reset these expectations so that I don't go crazy helping someone else.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to give a shout out to Sean and Xavier. I was just in their Centering Wellness workshop yesterday, and one of the prompts that they gave specifically was to indicate for next week what you're going to do with, they called it like your casual time, like your you time. And I just so appreciated that. It was so refreshing, because it's so much like, okay, what I got to do? I got to do this, I got to do that, make sure so-and-so is taken care of. And sometimes, obviously, our professional lives, we do that as well. But to actually sit and think, how am I going to calendar and center my casual, my personal time? It was just really refreshing. And I was like, wow, like I play the cello, right? And I've been re-engaging with my cello, and I love music. I'm not great, but I'm kind of good. I'm kind of decent, right? And the only way, obviously, I can maintain that is if I engage with the instrument. And so I'm saying this out loud to hold myself accountable, but I'm going to play my cello 2 times this week. And I did actually calendar it in, instead of just being like, oh, if I get to it, I get to it, because, I got long days. And so, we'll see what happens. But that intentionality of actually ensuring that I take that time for myself is so critical. And I remember I was talking, I know somebody earlier in the chat said I think it was Carrie, was talking about engaging with a mentor. I have a life coach, and I was talking about boundaries of time, and I'm always responding to email. And he was like, how can you position yourself so you're not in reactionary mode? You're not constantly reacting in your professional life. Like, say I'm gonna check email a certain time and then be done with it and move on, because it's gonna be there the next day. It will continue to pile up because it never goes away. We know it never goes away. But how can we really create some healthy boundaries for ourselves, right? So I'm happy that you did that you're creating those boundaries for yourself, that you spoke up with your friend.
I would like to hear how other people are creating healthy boundaries, because I think that's important. Sometimes it's even difficult with family, it's difficult with friends. Sometimes they put these high expectations, they put everything on you. Everybody's carrying a backpack. And within that backpack is all of our emotions, our fears, our trauma, everything. And sometimes we try to unload everything in our backpack in other people's backpack and expect for them to carry the load with you, around you, and all these different things. So I'm wondering how other people set those expectations, set those boundaries. Dr. Mackey and I are definitely, her and I could talk about this all day, but I want to know, what are you doing? And maybe we can learn and grow from some of the things that you're doing. I take a walk and turn on one of the master class sessions and let someone talk to me for a minute while I be quiet. That's part of my healing. I'm looking at some of these posts. They're pretty good. And if there's people who want to contribute verbally, please do so. We want to hear your thoughts and your opinions, and just some of the best practices that you have developed within your house. When we were talking about making your house a healing space, it could be simple as cleaning it up, because we know some people are triggered when they just see one dish in the sink. Some people are triggered if a chair is out of place. So what do we do to reduce the toxicity in our homes so it can be a place of healing and not a place of stress for folks?
I'm just looking in the chat as well. I see Carrie's saying, ask them what's on that backpack and why they're carrying. Why they're carrying that backpack. I think that's really poignant. Because sometimes we don't know why we're even carrying the load that we're carrying sometimes. And that's so much I know for me, the process I have to walk myself through. And I tend to do that with my life coach and my partner. My partner is very pragmatic and a realist. And so he'll just ask questions like, why are you doing that? For what? And sometimes I need that because I haven't even asked myself why I'm carrying certain things that don't necessarily sometimes need to be carried. See, go ahead, Omar.
No, I was about to say I may get kicked out of where I'm at in a few minutes. I just want to give you that answer just in case, and we're right in the middle of our session. But I want to share this about my experience today when we talk about self-care and helping others. When I came to volunteer at this vaccination clinic today, I didn't, I'm thinking, okay, we're going to sign people up. They're going to get their shot, and, we're going to keep going. When I looked in the people's eyes and they were like, hey, this is going to be a lifeline for me. I didn't put it in that perspective because I take health for granted. What I realized is that there are people here who are receiving their vaccination and they're looking at it as a life or death sentence. Let's think about that. A life or death sentence. That if I don't get this shot, there's a possibility that I could die. Now, can you imagine after they get the shot, how much better they feel when they go home? How much better they feel about just doing everyday things after they get their second shot in another 30 days? But can you imagine what life was like the past year for them prior to the vaccine? What their homes were like, what their environment was like. I mean, wow. I'm just I'm just amazed at how society may change after this period. I know it may not be exactly what we're talking about, but when we're talking about people who are looking, who believe this is a life and death sentence, and they're getting a shot, their whole personality changed from the time they get the shot and they're walking back to their car. You can see the smiles, you can see them, their whole vibe is different. I didn't think I was going to experience that today, and I did. Okay. Oh, Dr. Mackey, they're giving me the ring. They're telling me I got to go. Can you got it from here? All right, Dr. Mackey, thank you for everything. And thank you for all the participants that joined us for the workshop today. And I'm sorry I have to leave early, but they're kicking me out to space. Take care, everyone.
I think you're unmuted now, Dr. Love.
Oh, just kind of building on what Omar just said, in terms of how he witnessed people's disposition changing because it was so life-changing for him. I think in addition to that, it's the hope and the possibility of being back in community again, of being able to connect and reach out and to touch, even though we know we're going to need to still socially distance, we're going to still need to wear our mask, but we're a step closer to the possibility of being back in community again, because we are by nature just relational individuals. And like you mentioned, you like to hug. And some of that I think also is our culture. So this has just been difficult, not being able to touch, not being able to connect, having to say goodbye to someone you love dearly via a Zoom chat or something. So I think in addition to what he was saying is also recognizing that we're getting a little bit closer to being able to be in relationship with one another. And that's really important.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Dr. Love. Yeah, it definitely has been an extremely challenging time. And I appreciate that perspective as well with regards to the social aspect of vaccinations for folks as well, to be able to get back and being in relationship with folks in physical ways and in space with one another.
Yeah, and if we could just switch a little bit, or you want to stay on that, because I don't want to take you off that theme if there's still people who want to talk about that. But I wanted to bring another kind of point of view into the space, if possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, because I was still looking at your pyramid and the themes, and as you know, or people may or may not know, I do a lot of work around equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I did a facilitation 3 weeks ago with a group of individuals. They were all white. And by far, it was one of the most challenging groups I've ever had to sit in. And it got to fun, and I was co-facilitating. My co-facilitator was a white female. And it got to the point where I completed the course, but this may sound strange. It was just negative energy. And it was just negative energy, even though it was a Zoom call. And the negative energy was so overwhelming. It was difficult for me to stay centered and complete that session. And generally, after my partner and I kind of finish training together, we debrief. I said, I can't debrief right now. I literally had to go and take a shower and get back into a healthy space again. And that's when I noticed that self-care is just critical, because that negative energy can overwhelm you. And it's not like, oh, okay, I did this, tomorrow I'll be better. You have to be very intentional about how you protect your soul, because there are things out there in this environment now that are literally soul grabbing, spirit crushing. And it just, that session that I did 3 weeks ago, I mean, I had to really be intentional about getting back to my spirit again before I went to bed, because I didn't want to go to bed wrestling and flopping all over the bed. So I literally did some things, and it just calmed me down, and I came back in. But I remember what Dr. Allen said, that self-care is just critical, especially when you're doing this type of work.
Yeah, I so appreciate you sharing that. There's something about when you're holding space, especially when our identities are kind of literally on the line in a sense, right? In those spaces. So I really appreciate you sharing that. I definitely have had to think about that as well. What's coming to mind for me in you sharing that is even graduate school spaces. And I remember it was a situation where it was, I think this was like my last quarter of classwork. And, you know, again, this expectation to constantly be the one centering race, right? And so it got to the point where I had told everyone in that classroom space, and I told the professor as well, I was like, y'all, I'm tired. And I have a right to say I'm tired, and I'm tapping out. And I'm gonna pass the baton to one of the white classmates to pick up the mantle to talk about race today. Because this has to be shared work, and the taxation can't simply be on Black and brown bodies to hold that mantle and to hold that space. So that's what it's making me think about. And it's making me also think about, again, that's not only just your experience, right, Dr. Love, and mine, but so many of us who engage in that work to really push towards racial equity, and thinking about the boundaries that we can create for ourselves so that we can reground, we can recenter, we can really like humanize and acknowledge that we have a right to do so as well, that we deserve to do so as well. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I'll be quiet because I know I don't want to.
You're welcome.
I don't want to misenunciate your name. I think it was Aditi wanted to say something, and I believe that you are off of mute now, so you can speak.
Hi, sorry, I don't recall raising my hand. I'd entered something in the chat box earlier, but didn't have anything to add. Thanks.
Beautiful, thank you for that, I appreciate that. So I'm gonna move us along. Thank you all so much for your engagement in the chat. Thank you so much for your verbal engagement as well. Really appreciate the energy. And I'm definitely being restored in this conversation, and I hope that you all are as well. So it gets to a point, right, where Angela Davis indicates, I'm no longer accepting the things I cannot change, I'm changing the things I cannot accept. So with that in mind, I love mantras. So I am inviting you to create a mantra for yourself, really kind of around this question of how do you plan to heal? So I'm going to put on some music in the background and give you all some time to create a mantra for yourself, and then we'll share out.
Can't believe that Janiece really got me on my foot.
Awesome. So we're going to reel in now. Thank you all. I hope you enjoyed that music. That is a song that I'm literally practicing and trying to learn on my cello as we speak. I just think that cello is the heart of the orchestra, and orchestra music is really serene. So I would love to hear from folks on what mantras you created for yourself with regards to this kind of undergirding question of how do you plan to heal? So again, feel free to use the chat and or your hand up so we can know to unmute you. Thank you. Right on. Thank you, Vashon. I love that, Carrie. I utilize my shrine, sun, and breathing techniques. That's beautiful. I definitely am that person as well. I've been in meetings where folks will have grounding exercises and they ask us to engage in breathing. And at first, honestly, I think just because a busy schedule, I do get a little annoyed at first, like, let's just go ahead and get to it. But I do feel much more relaxed. I feel less tension, even in my spine and my shoulders. And there's just so much to breathing techniques that matter. And sunshine always, for sure. I know for me, summer is definitely my favorite time of year. But there is something about the sun that does something like literally to and in our bodies in metaphysical ways. So thank you for sharing, Carrie. What's coming up for other folks as far as your mantras? Thank you so much, Starzi, for sharing the difficulty around making a mantra. And no, I don't think you're necessarily overthinking it. I really appreciate your honesty. So with regards to mantras, they're definitely like forms of affirmations, I would say. And I know, like, when I was first asked to do something of this nature, it was definitely difficult for me as well, because there was just so many things I was thinking about. And I tend to also be a very wordy person. So it was hard for me to distill down into like a mantra or like an affirmation. I can definitely share a few that I came up with and would love to hear from other folks. So one of the things that I said was, I will be fully present. That's a mantra I came up with because I got 3 girls, and they're very much at the stage where they're literally in all the things, very active. And I noticed, like, my oldest daughter, she had a basketball game this morning, actually, and I was just constantly on my phone, right? And I was like, nope, I am going to put my phone down. I'm going to be fully present, whether she is or is not on the court. So even just that simple affirmation for me is something that I'm constantly trying to center, because not only do they deserve me to be fully present as their mama, but I deserve to be fully present even as a mom and experiencing that experience with them, and also showing them that I'm completely immersed and engaged with them in whatever the experience is that they're having. Another affirmation, I was talking about my cello. So I said, I will play my cello 2 times a week. Again, if I kind of make it a SMART goal, at least for myself as an affirmation, then that's something that I know I'll actually adhere to. And if I don't, hey, I'll pick back up the next week, right? But if it's something that I'm able to have kind of front and center as an affirmation for myself, then it's something that I can have as a goal for myself through mantra. Thank you so much, Starzi, for sharing that. What's coming up for other folks as far as mantras or affirmations? Can we unmute Dr. Love?
Thank you. It's easier for me because this is what's coming up for me, you know, when you asked that question, and I really appreciated the individual who said, you know, writing a mantra, you know, isn't particularly easy. Because what keeps coming up for me is like, I keep kind of stepping back into the spaces that I dance in most often. And one of the things that is really resonating with me right now is to continually choose how I'm going to respond to someone, and nourish my own spirit. Just do those things that nourish my spirit. And even when I'm in a meeting, listen deeply and determine those things that I can do something about and those things that belong to someone else that they're going to have to figure out. So I'll have to figure out how to put that in a mantra, but that's really what's resonating with me right now.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Dr. Love. I really appreciate that. There's definitely a lot there with regards to, it goes back to what, I can't remember who said it earlier, but they were talking about like why you're wearing the backpack, right? Like why you're taking on certain things. And so that resonates with me a lot as well, because, you know, I chop it up with you a lot, Dr. Love, about certain things as well. And it's this constant negotiation of honoring what I can and cannot control, and allowing other people's stuff to be their stuff, and being able to move on from that. Is definitely a practice for sure. I know that I'm working on myself. So I really appreciate you bringing that in this space, and that definitely resonates with me as well. Thank you for that, Star Z. Absolutely. Slow it down and find time to focus. Yes, 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 yes. That's beautiful. I have this notion for sure of like going slow to go fast. So that really resonates with me as well, with regards to the need to slow down. There definitely needs to be times in our schedule, right, where there's like just literally nothing on our calendar, and we're literally just kind of sitting in nothingness, in a sense of being with ourselves, right, and being fully present with ourselves so that we can focus. Because when we are creating things from hurriedness, right, or kind of being in the busy, if you will, it's probably not the best that we have. And capitalism, right, definitely socializes us into that. So I think that's a beautiful mantra, Starcy. Thank you for sharing. Anything else coming up for folks with regards to mantras? You can tell I'm an educator because I'm pretty good at wait time. So I just want to make sure everyone's voice is honored in this space who would like to share out. I see you, Carmen. Stop taking on other folks' mess. Yes, I'm a fixer, and it's difficult not to step in for others, even when they haven't asked. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you so much for that, Carmen. I think that's great. I think it's a great acknowledgement and mantra. It also goes back to this notion of that deep listening, right? I'm the same way. I'm completely with you as far as being a fixer. I was literally just having a conversation with my middle child. She was frustrated about something that she had done as far as some leadership that she was engaged in. And she didn't necessarily particularly like the way the event went. And so she was just venting, right? Like she was just kind of trying to get it off of her chest. And of course, here comes me, right? I'm like, oh, well, you know, maybe next time they could do this, or, you know, maybe you could protect and honor yourself next time by doing X, Y, Z. And she was just like, Mom, I didn't ask for that. She was just like, no, thank you, right? She was very much like, I just wanted to talk to you and I just wanted to tell you about it. I didn't want you to try and fix it or try and give me ideas about your thoughts about it. I just really wanted you to just be there and kind of be quiet and take it in. And I was like, wow, thank you. Her name is Ayana for that. But I think that's so important, especially for those of us who are kind of, you know, in that way, oriented professionally, personally, whatever it is, right? This tendency that we have to impose that on people when it's not even necessarily what they want. And then sometimes it's more so because it's something we want, and then we end up creating stress for ourselves. So that's beautiful. I really appreciate that as well. Thank you for that, Starzy. Let me see. But that mantra, slow down and focus, doesn't really build my spirit or infuse me in a positive way, but it does help me feel like I have more control over things that are spiraling. That's beautiful. Should the mantra make or have a specific purpose? I really appreciate that question, Starzy. You know, I really would say, and it's gonna feel like a non-answer, right? But really the mantra is about what spiritually grounds you, right? So I think to your point around feeling this sense of control over things that are spiraling, I mean, that's beautiful then, right? If you feel like I need a mantra that's gonna help me feel more in control of things that are spiraling, and to have some boundaries for myself, I think that's beautiful. There's definitely different purposes of mantras, depending on the context. But most importantly, I'll say for myself, the way that I tend to use them is for the purpose of affirmation, right? It's like that retelling to myself and regrounding of this sense of worthiness and deserving that I have to be well. So that's how I particularly use them, but absolutely they can be used in a whole host of ways. I appreciate that question. I'm gonna shift us, if that's okay. So I wanna be cognizant of time. So professionally speaking, I know we had talked about this a bit as well. There's definitely like those professional and personal type of mantras. So some things that I've thought about professionally with regards to mantras, like I was speaking of earlier, right, is your awakening to race and white supremacy is not my emergency. So I had to be very firm around boundaries last year, and continuously so, right, because of you know, the murder of George Floyd and Nina Pop and so many others, and this call to perform and making sure that I don't impose that on our youth village as well. I've literally been in conversations with funders, right, where perhaps they've given us some funding for our work in our organization, and they'll have loose guidelines, right? But then, you know, if we ask things about, you know, kind of some boundaries, whether it's timeline or scope, they'll say things like, well, you know, in light of, you know, the murder of George Floyd, you know, we would really encourage you to maybe create a new program or something of that nature. And I'm like, so you want us to just hurry up and create a new program and maybe it's only X amount of dollars, right? So really had to be cognizant of making sure that there was some healthy boundaries around creating an affirmation for myself in order to ensure that I'm not bringing down, right, kind of that nervousness around race, so to speak, from Gooden's work to the youth village. Something else is I deserve reciprocity. So many of you all who know me know I'm very much about reciprocity, right, which is very much about being in deep relationship with people and not being in tokenizing situations or relationships, ensuring that, you know, we're not putting ourselves in a situation where we're just someone's checkbox. We often get asked in policy spaces sometimes to sign on to things. And it's like, oh, well, you know, Dr. Mackey's Black and she works with BIPOC youth, right? So if we ask them to sign on, then we're good, right? Now we can kind of move on. We can say that we got BIPOC input, right? Which is Black, Indigenous, people of color input. And that's not the case, right? That's not reciprocity, right? That's not being in deep relationship with our organization or with our youth, right? So we'll tell folks, hey, if you want to know what you think, come to our events, right? Are you showing up when they're showing up? Because they'll tell you what they think, right? But we're not going to just be your checkbox. Another affirmation professionally is I will resist normative forms of progress. This one is so important, and it really comes from Grande's work on Indigenous ways of knowing. There's, very much, kind of one size fits all or capitalistic things, thinking, I should say, with regards to progress and what progress looks like. And so I had to get to this point where I said, progress is going to be on our terms, right? And particularly our youth's terms, because they're the experts of their own lived experiences. So progress is not always performative. That's something that I really had to ensure that our team knows, so that we can make sure we're holding space with students in really dignifying ways. I always tell funders, for instance, too, right? Hey, don't expect us to undo white supremacy in a year from your grant, right? That's extremely important. Yeah, I see you, Dr. Love. So her name is Grande, Sandra Grande, 2004 Red Pedagogy. And I can put in the chat too. It's beautiful literature with regards to, she goes through these different Indigenous ways of knowing, which I think is really dignifying, right, in the way we go about engaging with folks professionally so that we can create healthy boundaries for ourselves and ensure that we're centering and humanizing our self-care in these professional spaces, so that we're not then bringing kind of like white supremacy culture, right, into our constituent spaces as well. So further resources, obviously many, many more than this, right? But I was thinking particularly about humanizing self-care and some of the resources with regards to that. Some of you all may be familiar with Dr. Fernita Ware. She works in Denver Public School District, but does a whole host of things and trainings outside of that as well. And she particularly talks about radical self-care that has these 5 different areas that she talks about. I was talking about that earlier. Movement was one of them, which is very important. She talks about sleep as well, and eating. So definitely check her out in her work. She has trainings particularly grounded in radical self-care. Dr. Sean Jenwright, he put together healing-centered engagement. I don't know if it worked, but I do believe I put his article that he wrote in the Medium with regards to what that looks like. So often, a lot of times we talk about trauma-informed care. And so he pushes further and talks about healing-centered engagement. And again, this came from the creative genius of a Black youth that he was working with in California, who told him, I am not my trauma. And so often we approach folks that we're in space with as though they are their trauma, right? Rather than approaching them in healing-centered ways. So I highly encourage folks to check out his work. They also, I know, just came out actually with a healing-centered engagement certificate, I believe, as well, which is really dope. And his organization is called the Flourish Agenda. Kenyatta Fulton is local. I don't know if y'all are familiar with Kenyatta Fulton. She has held space with our team and our students through Remembrance Yoga, which is her organization. She specifically has Black, Brown, Indigenous folks of color who hold space in facilitating yoga, which has been really restorative, and breathing practices as well. At first, our youth are kind of like, miss, I'm not doing that, right? But then as they continue to have, relationship with her and her team over time, they're like, you know what, I can get into this. So definitely check out her work. Jason Schenkel is here locally as well. With Inner Self and Wisdom, we partner a lot with Jason Schenkel for our youth village and team. He is a licensed therapist, and so provides one-on-ones, which is great, and is able to literally tackle mental health challenges that folks are navigating, and ensuring that it's also from a lens, right, as a Black man, that's culturally relevant as well. Terrence Gordon of Total Gradual Growth. So if you're that person like, you know what, my mantra is something around food, Terrence Gordon of Total Gradual Growth, he actually just shared a talk with our students and our team about mind, body, gut decisions. And he literally knows all the things with regards to the decisions that we make that literally come from our gut, but the ways that it also impacts our gut, if you will, as well. And he knows kind of the psychological negotiations that are being made when we get stressed, and what type of foods we tend to go after when we're kind of in that stressful point in our lives or in seasons, right? So highly encourage you to check out his work too. And then lastly, YAASPA, in partnership with the Aurora and NAACP through Crystal Gillis, she hosts collaborative healing sessions with our youth village. Those are open to folks, particularly youth though. So we don't necessarily invite adults into that space unless adults are going to give of themselves, right? Because of reciprocity. So it's really a space not necessarily for adult consumption, but really for our youth to hone in on collaborative healing with one another. And she hosts those twice a month on Fridays. So if folks are interested in that, happy to get that information to folks as well. So now it's just an opportunity. I know we're running a little short on time here, but if folks have any further reflections that they would like to share out in this space, or that they would like to bring into this space before we close out. Right on, Starzy. I feel you on that. My youngest daughter, Imani, she is very much into chocolate, and she was that baby that was always like sneaking into the chocolate. And what she told me is that dark chocolate is actually really healthy. And so, I want to assume that my baby's right. So you may be good, who knows? But thank you for sharing that. Anything else coming up for folks that you want to bring in the space before we start having closing thoughts and remarks? All right, well, I'm going to transition us. So would just love to know what you gave the space today, or any wonderings that you may still have, and what you are leaving the space with today. So I'll model and start. What I hope I gave the space today was some frameworks, some wisdom, and some shared vulnerability with regards to how I'm navigating humanizing self-care as a Black leader activist in the space, in the ecosystem. Wonderings that I still have, probably immediate wonderings for me is how I'm going to actually operationalize and act on my mantras that I was sharing with you all to hold myself accountable. So that's a wondering that I have. What I'm leaving the space with today, I'm definitely leaving with a sense of community, definitely leaving also with a sense of restoration as well. I really enjoyed my time together with you all. So I'm very grateful. Thank you so much for showing up and sharing of yourselves. So yeah, it looks like everyone now has the ability to share. So you will be able to be unmuted if you'd like to do so.
For me, what I was trying to think through this, what I put in this space was really some things that I was trying to think through, and it was interesting because as I listened to Omar, excuse me, talk, there were a lot of things that kind of came up for me. So I think if I put it like this, I think it's out of the Sioux tradition. It says the longest journey you will ever take is that journey between your head and your heart. And this session was structured in a way that we could gracefully move from our head to our heart. So that's what I felt like was in this space, and I put in this space. And what I'm leaving with is knowing that, you know, we struggle with some of this stuff. You know, we don't have it down, and it's a constant challenge or a constant opportunity to put it in the positive, to really just remind ourselves that we deserve to treat ourselves well, and to honor the gifts that we've been given, because we all have a gift, and to just cherish it, honor it, and don't let anyone take it away from us.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Dr. Love. Yeah, this is messy stuff, right? And absolutely, I appreciate that. Thank you so much for your feedback. I hope it was a good ebb and flow of being able to connect heart and mind matter. That's beautiful. Thank you so much. What's coming up for other folks? Yes, Starzy, absolutely enjoy the dark chocolate. Deserve it.
I can feel.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Well, I see that. Oh, I see what happened is I was touching the cell phone and I saw a name. And it was actually your name, so my apologies. So I have a hearing loss, and so I wear hearing aids. And since my hearing loss has gotten worse, I utilize several technology. And this is the first time that I've had to use the technology of Wave, and then it appears that Wooba, and then Wooba then moves into utilizing Zoom, I believe. And so when I was asked to unmute myself, I kept on looking at something that was showing me that I was muted, and it's actually just my Bluetooth. So I'm still learning technology. And so what I gave this space today was a little humor regarding the backpack, and like asking somebody, what are you carrying in that backpack, or what is inside that backpack? And then once you become aware of it, whether it's something that is personal or professional, then you'll know because there are times when I remember as a professional, I had clients carry backpacks, and I would ask them, what do you have in that backpack? And one time a client said, I have a pair of scissors in my backpack and I'm going to take them out. And I said, well, you better rethink about that. And so I used that as a way to say there was a part of me and I was going to take off running because I thought the client was going to harm myself, or the client was known to harm themselves. And so I was doing crisis work at that time. And so the wonderings that I still have is still being able to honor myself personally and professionally, but then yet being able to honor myself when I have to say no or that I'm overwhelmed. And so what I leave with the space today is being able to utilize humor, but then to also be able to utilize personal techniques and then professional techniques to be able to continue doing this work.
That's beautiful, Carrie. Thank you so much for sharing. And absolutely, like laughter definitely is soothing to the soul as well. So I appreciate you bringing that into this space and centering that, as well as a technique or a tactic in order to humanize self-care. Probably have time maybe to hear from one more person before it's a wrap. Thank you, Carmen. It was really good to see you as well. Thank you so much for being in this space today. Awesome. Well, without further ado, I just want to thank you all for showing up in the space. Oh, I see you, Starzy. Yes, absolutely. So that resource slide I shared, definitely those are folks, if you would like to do some of this work in community, who have a ton of resources, as well as like different techniques as well. I'd be happy to here, I'll put my email in the chat. If you send me an email, I will make sure you get that slide of resources as well. I would also definitely say really grounding yourself in Indigenous, particularly ways of knowing, I think is really important. So the person I put in the chat earlier, Sandra Grande, I believe it's particularly 6 different types of Indigenous ways of knowing that she goes over in order to really center yourself. Not in an individualistic way, right? But in ways that are more humanizing and dignifying in order to honor yourself. With regards to scheduling time for yourself, Starzy, I honestly, this is just me, but I live by my calendar. So to the point where I was talking earlier about our team members, Tashawn and Xavier, who literally had asked us in our wellness space to calendar casual time, right? We calendar everything else, right? We calendar where we have to be professionally. We calendar when we have to go to, our kids' games and whatnot. What we don't oftentimes do is calendar that particular time for ourselves, or calendar even just open space in our calendar for ourselves as well. So I would definitely recommend that too. Is literally calendaring, when you want to eat your dark chocolate, for instance. Or for me, when I want to play my cello, literally calendaring that in. But also really kind of being connected to mind and body and spirit. So checking in with yourself on that and how you're feeling in your body. And I see Yolanda, I see that it's time. But again, thank you all so much for joining and sharing in the space and sharing of yourselves as well. I hope that this has been just a small space and time in order to remind yourself that you are worthy of humanizing self-care. With that, much love and hope you have a great afternoon.
Yolanda, you're muted.
I'm sorry about that. I want to thank Dr. Mackey and President Omar. Sometimes your head thinks you need to be somewhere, but your heart knows where you will feel love. So I want to thank you so much for this presentation. And remember that if you have enjoyed this, to respond using your Whova app, letting us know how much you like this session. And there were numerous resources. Please utilize at least one. Don't try to eat them all at one time. There's in the Odoo, it says, how does a snake eat a rat? And the snake eats a rat bit by bit. So I say that very lovingly when you are beginning to create time and self-care. Remember, we learn it bit by bit. We don't try to jump right into that. I'm on the beach with an umbrella drink and no laptop. So thank you again so much, everyone. And thanks for joining us.